Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, June 8th, 2026, and I'm the host of the show, Dr. Cara Santamaria. And as always, before we dive into this week's episode, I want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, this show is and will always be 100% free to download as long as I can keep it on the air. We're in our 605th episode. Wow. And many of you have been with us from the very beginning. I want to give a shout out to this week's top patrons. They include Chuck Blell, David J. E. Smith, Daniel Lang, Mary Neva, Will Dufresne, David Compton, Brian Holden, Gabo J., Ulrika Hagman, Pasquale Gelati, Rika Maharaj, and Joe Wilkinson. Thank you all so much. All right, let's not waste any time and get into this week's episode. I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Chad M. Topaz. Chad is a professor of complex systems at Williams College and co-founder of the Q-Side Institute, which uses data science to promote equity and justice. He's received several awards from different international and national communities, all about the studies that he's written, that he's published, and of course his opinion pieces as well, that sort of exist at the intersection of data science, social justice, and public policy. His new book is right along that vein. It's called Unlocking Justice: The Power of Data to Confront Inequity and Create Change. So without any further ado, here he is, Dr. Chad M. Topaz. Well, Chad, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Cara. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun chat. I'm looking forward to talking about your new book, Unlocking Justice: The Power of Data to Confront Inequity and Create Change. So before we get into Unlocking Justice, I want to learn a little bit more about you. I always like to kind of start off the episodes with a bit of background. So you are, I love your title, you're a professor of complex systems. Like, does every single person you talk to go like, what does that mean when you first tell them?
Pretty much, yes.
So what department would a professor of complex systems be working in?
Well, my department is perhaps hilariously called the Department of Humanities, which makes me sound even more confusing than I already do. But I would say, Cara, that people who work on complex systems come from like a range of different disciplines. And what we all have in common is wanting to understand the ways that macroscopic behaviors and patterns and structure and order come out of groups of things that are interacting with each other.
So are we talking everything from psychology to sociology to economics to even like mathematics?
Absolutely. And my own background, I'm trained as a mathematician. That's my background. But yes, I think all of those disciplines have inroads into complex systems for sure. So
you are a pattern-seeking creature. I love this. And so, are we talking like big data here? Are we talking the sort of intersection between all of the, pieces of information that we collect all the time, either actively and intentionally or passively through other systems, and how we can actually use that data for, I guess, good and not evil?
Yes, that's exactly right. And I guess just to share maybe 10 seconds worth of the story, I mentioned I'm trained as a mathematician, and I used to work on complex systems in physics, in chemistry, and in biology, and I found that work really rewarding. But I also had this very political activist side to me, and I eventually sort of realized that the issues out in the world that I was really passionate about and the quantitative skill set that I had could be brought together to work on some of these justice issues that are, the things that make me mad when I wake up every morning and read the news.
Oh, hear. I absolutely love to hear it. So when we talk about these sort of these areas where you had already been spending your time studying outside of academia, marching, engaging in political activism, are we really talking about all of those obvious places, and I guess not so obvious places, where vulnerable people are disadvantaged by a system? So we're talking racial issues, gender, queer issues, issues around poverty, just all the places where we can highlight that individual people have been, I guess, unfairly disadvantaged.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think you've given a pretty great definition of what social justice is really about. I think I am a strange melange of of privilege and lack of privilege, and that weird mix is kind of what has brought me to this table of working on social justice issues. So, on one hand, I am a cis white man who grew up in a very privileged setting in the northern suburbs of Chicago. And on the other hand, I am a now married gay man who kind of came of age in the 80s and 90s and have put up with my fair share of things on account of that identity. And so that is part of what has brought me to the table. But of course, I am trying to use the places where I have privilege and use the places where I have voice to bring some attention to issues that maybe people like me don't always pay as much attention to.
I think that's such an important point that you make, and it's one that I guess I relate to really deeply. I mean, first and foremost, the listeners probably know this, but to kind of parallel your description. So I guess I would be considered. I'm a cis woman, and I am white. I present white, and I'm afforded all the privileges of whiteness. But I'm half Puerto Rican. I guess I identify as queer, and I live in these, but I'm also like, I have a PhD, like, and so do you, right? So like, there's like a huge amount of privilege that comes from having navigated these academic, I guess, structures as well. And so it's an important, I guess, point about intersectionality, that there are those whose voices are not elevated enough. And then there are those of us who are in positions where we can work to elevate those voices. And sometimes the very people doing that work are the people with the privilege, and are the people whose colleagues and peers do not recognize why this work matters.
I think that's exactly right. And I write a little bit about this in the book. So I have a chapter that's maybe comes off as memoir, but it's really meant to be about my own positionality. And I
Mm.
think, positionality is a tool where the point of it isn't to sow doubt on the way we think about things because of who we are. The point of positionality is to provide transparency and help everyone see how our backgrounds informs our views and the ways we think about things. And so on that note, I sort of talk about how I actually, I do care about LGBTQIA plus issues. I care about them deeply, but most of the work that I do in social justice, despite the fact that I'm a white man, is on issues of race and gender, because
Mm.
those are axes of identity on which I have a ton of privilege, and people listen to me because I'm a white man. Now,
Mhm.
there's a lot we can say about that, because this potentially steers dangerously into savior territory. And so there's a lot that needs to be said about
Mhm.
how one tries to avoid that. But that's the basic idea is, I, because of my identities, I've been given a voice. And so I think like many other people who care about things and share my identities, I'm just trying to use those tools.
Absolutely. And I mean, yeah, I hear you. This idea of like, it does steer dangerously into savior territory, and also like appropriation, I think, territory. And at the same time, like, I'm not going to say but, I'm going to say and, I've had so many conversations, let's say with my partner, for example, where he will discuss, because I identify as queer, my partner identifies as queer, um, uh, and yet from the outside it looks like we're in a heteronormative relationship. And so he will discuss some of his male colleagues and peers, uh, especially his white male colleagues and peers, like views and opinions, especially in this sort of post-Trumpian world where we're living. I mean, just the other day, gosh, I hope he doesn't get mad at me for outing him for this, but the other day he was saying how he was at this this art thing because he's an artist, and folks were talking about, oh, it's just like men can't even get single solo shows anymore. They're all going to win. And he was like, are you fucking kidding me? And so we're always talking about how important it is for him to speak up in those moments because they may not listen to me. The very sensibility that underlies somebody bitching and moaning about women getting all of the art shows is going to make it so that my opinion weighs less to them than a male counterpart opinion. And it's frustrating as that is. That's the reality of the world we're in.
I think this is absolutely true. And, I experience this. People get mad at me because of the things I say in defense of other groups. And, I can handle it because it's actually very hard to hurt me, Carol. Like, I'm a upper middle class cis white man who's like tenured and promoted at a fancy college. Like, there's so little other than saying mean words. There's so little that people can do to me. And in most ways, I'm really like not vulnerable. I wanted to circle back to the thing about art because this is so interesting to me. My book is really about social justice as it pertains to race in the criminal legal system. But I tell a story early on about how part of what brought me to doing this kind of work was another project that was specifically about demographic diversity in art museums.
Oh, wow.
And so this is the story here, if I can share with you, is that I live in the northern Berkshires, so in the northwest corner of the state of Massachusetts. And 10 minutes from my house is the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, MassMoCA. And oftentimes people think, oh, a big art museum in Massachusetts is in Boston. But actually, no, MassMoCA is a giant museum, and it's 10 minutes away from me out here in Western Mass. And soon after I moved here in the summer of 2017, a new wing was opening at MassMoCA, and I happened to be friends with a bunch of artists, sort of in person and online, and they were all discussing the fact that, like, wow, did anyone notice that all of the new artists, shown in the new wing at MassMoCA are white dudes? And I was like so naive. I was like, oh, I'm like typing at my computer on Facebook because this was 10 years ago. I was like, oh, is diversity in the art world a problem? ? And my friend who's like an art scholar is like, Chad, yes, like get with the program. It's like a huge problem. And I'm like,
it's a problem literally everywhere. So why would it avoid that part of this, the social milieu? Yeah.
Exactly. But I said, but how big? And he's like, big. And I'm like, okay, but I am a numbers nerd. How big? And he's like, shrug, like no one actually knows. And I thought, okay, I actually know how to help figure this out. And I don't at all want to say that counting something is the thing that makes it real. That is not true at all. And it is a very key, important message of my book that like numbers are one way of understanding things and they give us a lens, but they do not replace humans. There are other ways of knowing things, and ultimately it's human stories and human experiences matter. But that said, we were able to show numerically the extent to which major U.S. art museums are just absolutely dominated in their collections by white men. And we were able to use this to open some conversations with museum curators and kind of force them to reckon with a truth that I think they may have been more able to deny previously.
Right, without the actual like statistics in front of them. And I think, I had in a micro version of that a similar experience when I was getting all like huffy when we were texting about this. He was overseas at the time, and I was like, what do they mean? What is their argument? He was like, oh, just that it's so hard for like a dude, or especially like a white dude, to get a solo art show because of like the culture, the DEI kind of culture we're living in. And I just like literally Googled for 2 minutes, and I was like, 87% of exhibited artists in major U.S. museums are men. 70% of artists exhibited in major galleries are men. And how about this one? 96% of art sold at auction is by male
Mm-hmm.
artists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was like, oh no, those 96% of men are having a hard time right now.
I know. Carrie, you know what? As a white man, I can make this joke. It's like white dudes will like lose 1% of what they have and complain about it before they go to therapy, right? So,
Yes, yes, they will do anything before therapy, right? It's like my favorite meme online is like dudes doing MMA or like all sorts of
yes.
really aggressive. They'll do anything before therapy. No, it's such a major concern, and again, like part of our privilege is being able to laugh about this right now because I can imagine that there is a queer Black female artist who's listening to this episode and who's like there's like smoke coming out of her ears,
Completely.
or this is causing like a triggering of some real trauma, and that's I think part of I'm so glad we're having this conversation today because this is just a small thing by comparison. But I literally just sent this morning a message to somebody at the hospital where I work. I'm a psychologist in a large hospital. About the fact that, and I wasn't saying this is institution wide because it's absolutely not, but that there are certain pockets of individuals where consistently they refer to me as Kara when they refer to male physicians as
Uh,
Dr. So and so. And
uh-huh.
I think part of it is the intersectionality of being a woman versus man. But then I was like, they refer to some of the other psychiatrists as Dr. So. And then I was like, oh, is it because I'm a psychologist and not a psychiatrist? Because my doctor is a PhD and not an MD. And I think that's another area. It's a weird nuanced area in hospitals where there is some amount of like inequity around titling. And I hate having to talk about it because it makes me sound petulant. And at the same time, it's not a good precedent because it's steeped in so much sort of gendered nonsense, just a lot of history around women having to work 10 times as hard to get the exact same outcome as a man.
Completely agree. This is also a thing in my experience in academia, right? So I teach at a small liberal arts college where part of what
Mhm.
we prize is like just really sort of like close knit relationships with our students where we work one on one with them and are very accessible to them, and it's that kind of experience. And in my
Mhm.
teaching career, I've always gone by my first name. Call me
Right.
Chad. And at some point in my career, a colleague of mine who I respect greatly and who is a woman said to me, like, it's great that you can do that with your students. But like, I don't actually have quite the same privilege of being able to do that because my students already like have a hard time believing that I'm a professor or
Right.
that I'm a doctor or that I am someone who they should like pay some modicum of respect to. And it was really important for me to hear that and really important for me to think about that. And so now this is like something that I discuss with colleagues, like,
Mhm.
how are you comfortable like with me titling myself? And I also discuss it with my own students. Like, if you're going to
Right.
call me by my first name, we can have that agreement, but you need to understand, like, here are some of the structures at play. You can't do this with your other faculty. You need to follow like how they want to be addressed and realize the positions that they're in. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's tough when it's nuanced, right? And I remember, like, I was grappling with my wording, and I think I said something like, "Among colleagues and in the right context, I'm perfectly happy being called Kara. Like, I don't mind that you call me Kara and that so and so calls me Kara. But what I don't like is when in written correspondence in the same context, you call me Kara and then you call so and so Doctor so and so. Like that
yeah,
sets a horrific precedent
yep.
because then people don't even know what my title is or what it kind of what's appropriate within a business meeting. It's like, oh my god. And I think that that's just one example of like so many under the radar areas of kind of unequal treatment that then translate to uh disparities in the social or in the criminal justice system, disparities with global poverty. It's like these little things are directly related to really really big things, aren't they?
Yes, I mean, I think that many times, and I'm always a little bit careful with this word because when we say the word microaggression, it makes it sound like the thing is unimportant, and I think that's not the meaning of the word microaggression.
Right.
I
It's
think it
more that
means
like
it's
people don't realize they're doing it, right? Not that it
right.
doesn't have like huge psychological impact.
Right. And that it's happening on a very localized scale around you,
Hmm.
right? It's your
Hmm.
personal experience. But I do think that the source of these microaggressions and the source of, the big structural disparities that we see out in the world, those things are really tied together, undeniably.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious, in your career thus far, whether we're talking about your, I guess, your doctoral dissertation, back whenever that was, all the way up through the active research that you're engaged in now, or the work that your students do, or even your teaching. Um, how has big data taken, I guess, how has that been positioned in some of these important questions that you've been asking? What are you kind of been focusing on throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started out in my academic career, like as a graduate student, I worked in physics. I worked in fluent physics. Like I was so far from this stuff you can't even believe. And it
Yeah.
was not very data driven. But the past couple of decades have seen what we like to describe very commonly as the deluge of data or the proliferation of data. We have access to more data than we've ever had before. We also have access to more computing power than we've ever had before. And these things make new inquiries possible, right? Like new
Hmm.
routes of investigation that we could not do previously. And so really, like the work that I describe in my book is centered around using data relevant to the criminal legal system to expose and hopefully remedy injustice, specifically around race and specifically around issues such as policing and bail and criminal sentencing.
Okay.
Those are things that I've been really putting a lot of attention on. And I think there's two stories there. One is just like the story of the disparities and the discrimination and how data can help us. The other is sort of a meta story about data itself and why it is that even in this era of data, sometimes getting information about the way our criminal legal system is operating is way harder than it should be, given what our rights are in this country. And so
Mm.
that's a whole other level to the book. Is like, what are the forces that shape our access to data? What are the forces that shape biases inherent in the data? All of these sorts of things. And I mean, I'll pause here because I don't want to filibuster you with my speech, but I have some absolutely bonkers stories about the way data has been made inaccessible to hide injustice and the ways that data itself has encoded racist things over the years.
Okay, I am fascinated and excited to get into that because I have a feeling that's going to be what we spend the majority of this hour on. I wanted to flag beforehand. It's so funny you're talking about these different kind of layers and this sort of like meta kind of I guess yeah, layer or component to the book. And it's I was about to, I was like biting my tongue. I was like, oh, I want to talk about process and content. And I got some feedback from a listener recently that was like, that one episode where you were going on about process and I could not follow. That was so boring. And I was like, okay, good to know. But it's definitely something I think about a lot as a psychologist. And I often talk about with my students, the trainees that I supervise, is even like when we're in a therapy session, there is a difference between process and content. Like the content is the stuff. And sometimes in therapy, people will get in the weeds talking about all the minutia and the details of the stuff. And that can be really important. That can be necessary to get something off your chest and to feel validated or to really do the work. And then the process is, from a psychological perspective, it's the how would I put this? It's the sort of top-down umbrella gestalt of what that stuff represents. Oh, okay, here's a pattern. I'm seeing that over and over you're struggling with boundaries. Like we could talk about all the little things, and then she said this, and he said this, and she said, but really, like I'm hearing over and over that like you're trying to set boundaries for other people instead of setting boundaries for yourself. Let's like unpack that.
Yeah.
And so a book like this, I was curious, how much did you struggle with, okay, do I talk about individual specific stories and examples? Because that's the stuff that I think really gets people interested. That's the content, but in service to helping us understand these processes, because it's not just, I guess, a conglomeration. It's not just like a laundry list of insults. It's not a laundry. Okay, and then here's this story, and then here's this story, and then like really after a while, we have to recognize that a pattern is emerging from this data and that there are systems at play. And I feel like that for some reason is much harder for the citizenry to understand. They love saying that guy is racist, and they really struggle with the idea that a system could be racist.
Yes, I completely agree. And so that is a major mission of the book. And the way that you're talking about content and process, I would say
Mhm.
the sort of analogy I've made in the book is to think about like when you watch a movie and there's the movie and then there's the director's track, which was like what
Mm.
was the story going on behind the movie that maybe
Mhm.
informs why it is the way it is secretly. And that's the way I look at the book. And so there's these stories of injustice in the criminal legal system and us using data to address it. And then the director's track is the part that talks about why was getting the data so hard? Why are these the racial categories in the data? Wow, that's a really messed up set of categories. Like, wow,
Mhm.
why is it that we have eugenicists who are using data this way, right? And so
Yeah.
the book is really an attempt to give those things more or less equal weight. Yeah.
Oof. Speaking of you, I love that you use that example. I'd love to dig into that. I always like to tell the story of like I was watching a talk once as an undergraduate when I was, had my little naive baby brain and I was still learning so much. I mean, I'm still learning so much, but man, was I learning so much back then. And there was a visiting scholar who told a story about the kind of the foundations of uh, psychological a lot of our statistics was first developed by psychologists, and a lot of it was developed with the express kind of intention of proving the superiority of white people. Like this
Yes.
was it was like an overt decision that was made. I'm going to develop an IQ test and I'm going to do it in such a way that it shows that white people are superior, and then I'm going to analyze the data using these regression models and all these different tools. See white people better. Like this was like eugenicists were all over early psychology. I mean, and it's still in there, right? And so, but they were also talking about genetics, and genetics was founded in eugenics, and they showed this. It's still to my days like burned in my memory, this image of, I don't know many people who are listening to the show if you've spent much time in academia, but if you've ever visited a university library where all the periodicals are, they get
Mhm.
bound up in books every however many years, right? So you don't just have the individual journals, you have like these years of journals in this hardcover, and they all look the same and very fancy, like law books almost. And it literally showed the changeover from this one journal going from being called the Annals of Eugenics to the Annals of Genetics the next year. And I was like,
Wow.
whoa. And it was just so
Wow.
like telling. And yeah, I always love to tell that story. And I haven't been able to find the image since. So if anybody has that image, send it my way because I want to put it in every talk ever. Okay, go ahead. Tell me a little more about these eugenicists that you mentioned.
Oh, well, must I? Okay. All I was going to say about the eugenicists is, we have this phrase like lies, damn lies, and statistics. And I think, as you said, eugenics is infamous as like a really effective and extremely harmful way of misusing statistics. So the eugenicists did a lot of conflating correlation with causation in
Mm-hmm.
ways that claim things like a criminality is an inherited trait, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
not caused by structural things like poverty, but like, oh, some families just be crimemen. Eugenicists relied on biased data, so they would do things like collect data from prisons and asylums, and then analyze the data and say, like, oh, like, there's these racial groups in these prisons and asylums, and they have all of these, weaknesses shown in their statistics. But of course, what this ignores is that these people have been plucked out of life and placed in
Mm.
circumstances that limit their education and opportunity. So those are just two examples, but yes, they did a lot of really
Yeah.
bad stuff. And I really want to be careful also that I shouldn't only use the past tense, because we think of eugenics as like being a thing that was like, back in the day and used as sort of justification for Nazi Germany. But we have plenty of eugenic ideologies that are rearing their heads to this day.
Absolutely. And it bears repeating, and I've said it a million times on the show, so this should not be new to you, listener. We exported that ideology from the United States to Germany. Like, these were not ideas that were somehow fundamentally German ideas. There was a massive eugenics movement in the United States, and many of those ideas, which were seen at the time as positive, like it was all about like living better through good genes and healthy families. Like, it was definitely positioned that way here in the US prior to the 1930s, which I think is an important point to make. But there's a modern example I think of, and I wonder if you've come across this. There's a test in the in psychology called the MMPI, and it's probably one of the most studied. It's Minnesota Multiphasic Personality not industry. God, why am I blanking on my words? The Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, and it's this really intense test with a million different kind of scales inside of it, and it spits out, now there's like computer ways to score it, but it can say, oh, this person has, a little hit over here on psychopathy, and over here it looks like there's some difficulty with social interaction, and over here there may be some, gendered self questioning, and over it's a fascinating test. It's one of the most well researched tests, and it does have a lot of good things going for it. But who consistently scores high on scales of paranoia? Black people.
Mm.
And literally, now when we teach this test, we have to be like, this test is biased. See
Yeah.
here? It's written
Yeah.
from a white perspective, where they ask questions like, the police are out to get me. And if people say yes, they flag that as psychosis.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it's like all of this stuff has to be seen in a social context that understands inequity. But when it's written with an assumption that everyone's on a level footing, everything downstream gets really off.
Absolutely. Well, Tara, it's funny you would mention the police.
Yeah.
It's not funny. But
Mhm.
one of the chapters of my book is about my own small town of Williamstown, Massachusetts, town of
Mhm.
8,000 people out here in Western Mass in the Berkshires, where I learned a couple years after arriving here that there had been a picture of Hitler posted in the police station for about 20 years.
What?
And this led us on a journey to try to obtain data about what the police department was doing. And one of the things we learned from studying this data is that the rate at which different racial groups in town are accessing police services is vastly, vastly different. And for
Mhm.
anyone paying attention, this should not come as a surprise, right? Like if you are someone like me, who's a white man, who's not in groups that are targeted by the police, who's generally not had threatening interactions with the police, if I have a public safety concern, I might not hesitate too much to pick up the phone and report my concern. But if
Mhm.
you are someone from a demographic group who's targeted by the police, right, who experiences violence, including murder by the police, you might hesitate to pick up that phone and report a safety concern. You might worry that if you call, you will find yourself actually being the target of the
Yeah.
police and not whatever is the concern you called about. And this is something that we see showing up in our data that we obtained in this small town where we indeed had a Hitler picture in the police
Ugh.
station.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and I think like until you actually look at those numbers, again, you mentioned before, and it's such an important point. I think it bears highlighting and repeating. Something is not true only because we have statistics to back it up, but it definitely makes it harder to reject and deny and hide from once we have the numbers that back it up. I remember having a conversation with two very dear friends. We were all in like a very deep and I think sensitive conversation at the time. I mean, this would have been like about a year ago, so contextually it would make sense about uh, sort of the issues, the anti-Semitism facing Jewish folks in the world today, and also the abject racism facing Black folks in the world today. And it was a Black not Jewish friend and then a white Jewish friend, and all kind of having a conversation about this. And my Jewish friend made a point, and this was in the context of saying we are not talking about the oppression Olympics here. Nobody is trying to out, uh, inequity each other, right? But she said, when I call the cops, they still come and they come fast. And to
Right.
me, that is an indicator of how society is treating these two different groups. Like we have our massive issues, and yes, I feel unsafe in this sort of zeitgeist, but I am not as afraid. And I think that was a turning point in Trump's America is when, a white woman protester was shot point blank by ICE. Everybody said,
Mm.
oh shit,
Mm-hmm.
the privilege that we thought was there isn't there. And then a white man, and so and I think that brings it, that is such a perfect example of privilege becoming crystal clear and bringing the issues home for everybody, is when somebody who was like, well, but you, like you said before, like it's hard to hurt me, and then it's like all of a sudden, oh no, that is a real obvious indicator that we are all on the same team fighting for the same thing. And yes, we are still afforded significantly more privilege, but when it comes down to it, it's like every punk rock lyric, first they came for then they came for and
Yup.
now who's left to defend us?
Indeed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Indeed.
Woof. So on that really like, bone chilling
Lightheart.
note. Yes, lighthearted this show is. Let's talk a little bit about some of those, as you said, like these kind of bonkers banana stories that you came across, how you chose what you wanted to talk about in the book, and maybe you can highlight a few of them for us.
Sure. Um, Well, my students ask me this too. They say, like, Chad, how do you decide what like projects to work on? And
Mhm.
honestly, like I wake up really early every day and I drink coffee and I like am busy feeling irate about things. And the answer is like what I feel irate about
Yeah.
is what I try to work on. Although I want to say that I want my irateness to be inclusive, right? Like
Right,
I
right.
don't I don't want to pick and choose the things that matter because of what you just said. And like
Mhm.
we're not free until we're all free, right?
Mhm.
Um, in any case, I'll tell you a story. So you may remember, and the listeners may remember, a man called Paul Manafort.
Mhm.
Paul Manafort was Donald Trump's like first campaign chair in Donald Trump's like campaign for his 2016 election. And Paul Manafort was credibly accused of doing a whole bunch of illegal stuff, and he was prosecuted and he was convicted. And one day I was reading the news, and there was a headline that was like, the public and legal experts gasp when Manafort given 47 months, like despite recommended 17 to 24-year sentence. And I was like,
Mm.
what?
Nobody
Like, what's
gasped.
going
Yeah.
on? Like,
No.
I didn't, and I have been like so shielded from the criminal legal
Yeah.
system that I like didn't even know how criminal sentencing works because it's not a thing I've ever had to contend with. But I just thought, wow, this sounds bonkers that
Mhm.
there could be like guidelines that recommend decades worth of prison for this convicted man. And actually what he got was under 4 years. And in the end, he ended up serving substantially less than that even.
Oh, right.
And so
Yeah,
this,
that doesn't surprise me either.
yeah. So this
Yeah.
this sent me on a very long journey to
Hmm.
educate myself about what we know about criminal sentencing in this country. And because Paul Manafort was prosecuted and convicted for federal crimes, I'm thinking in this story primarily of our federal court system.
Okay.
And I learned that it is very well known that there are, in aggregate, gross racial disparities in criminal sentencing. So when you sort of do apples and to apples comparisons of black men to white men and or Hispanic Latin men to white
Hmm.
men, that those minoritized racial groups receive much longer criminal sentences for the exact same crimes and even having the same criminal histories, essentially just for the crime of not being white, right?
Right,
Like
right, right.
they are getting longer sentences. And I was like, wow, how can this be? And so then I had to learn about how criminal sentencing works. And I learned
Hmm.
how much discretion judges actually have in choosing a criminal sentence. We have guidelines that recommend sentences based on many, many factors. The US criminal sentencing handbook is like 600 plus pages long. So it's a very complicated set of rules for recommending criminal sentences. But in the vast majority of cases, with very few exceptions, judges have latitude to just choose the sentence.
Which
And
is why it's important when judges are installed with a political agenda.
heck yes, it is. And so
Yeah.
but Kara, this is where I started losing my mind. So I thought
Hmm.
like, well, we know that there's these gross racial disparities, and we know judges are these people with vast discretion and very secure, like lifetime appointment jobs. So like, who are the judges who are giving these biased sentences? I was like, we must know. Surely we know. And it turns out we don't know. And it turns out that the reason we didn't know is because the data that is put out by the federal judiciary about federal criminal sentences does not include the name of the judge who gives the sentence. This
Hmm.
was strange to me because there is a Supreme Court case called Richmond Newspapers versus Virginia. I think this is from the year 1980. And one of the outcomes of this case is that criminal courtrooms in the United States are open. We actually have a constitutional right to walk into criminal courtrooms and observe what's happening. And what this
Yeah.
means is that if you and I had all the time and money in the world, and if we were really well organized, we could get all of our friends together to go sit in all the courtrooms and record data. Like, here's the case that I saw, and here's what the crime was, and the person was convicted, and these are some demographics about the individual, and this is what the sentencing guidelines recommended as their punishment when they were found guilty, and here's the punishment that the judge actually gave them, and here's who the judge was. And
Hmm.
theoretically, we're allowed to know all of these things, and we could analyze all that data and figure out what courtrooms specifically are these harsh sentences for racial minoritized groups coming from. But the government isn't giving us that information. So I think it's a really poignant example of the difference between having a right on paper and being able to exercise or operationalize that right. And so the quest that
Yeah.
my collaborators and I had to go on was figuring out how to re-identify the missing judge names in all of these hundreds of thousands of federal sentencing records. And that itself is a bit of a story. But that's one example of a story that really drew me in.
Oof. Yeah. I mean, oh gosh, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, obviously, you wrote about that in the book. Do you bring these, the awareness of these kind of deep systemic issues into your, um, curriculum, for example?
Oh,
Is this something that has really shifted the way that you speak in public, but also teach your students?
absolutely. So at my institution, I'm teaching two classes I created, and one is called Data for Justice. And I'm really all about broadening the pathways into doing this kind of work. Math and statistics and computation are fields that have really systematically excluded racial and gender minorities, not to mention other groups. And I am about trying to broaden that pathway. So I teach this Data for Justice class that's designed for anyone who's never programmed a computer before and never done statistics before. And I'm really trying to teach students some fundamental some fundamental data science skills in a
Mm-hmm.
social justice context. And that includes both technical skills and those sort of like director's track, like thinking critically about data skills. So yes, I bring these kinds of issues and stories in there. And then I teach a more advanced course that's Data for Justice Research Practicum. And all that course is a semester long of students doing research projects, original projects on various justice issues that they are passionate about.
Oh,
So
that's,
it's
yeah.
it's really rewarding to get. I mean, I'm very, very fortunate to work with the amazing students that I get to work with. They're great.
I love that. So tell me, a little more about like the book itself. We talked about the positionality chapter, which I discovered when I was working on my dissertation because I did like a qualitative, like an existential hermeneutic, a sort of phenomenological dissertation, and I was steeped in the like philosophy literature of how to write phenomenologically. And I remember working really hard on a similar chapter that was sort of like, this is where I am coming from as I am doing this research. And these are
Mm,
the biases that I'm aware of. I can only explicate what I can see, but I continue to dig deeper and make those things apparent so that you, dear reader, and other researcher, kind of can understand how I am positioned or situated within all of this context. So we discussed the positionality chapter, which of course is right there at the beginning. We talked a little bit about policing, of course, Hitler's shadow.
yes.
But how about some of these other aspects of criminal justice? Bail, jail, sentencing, risk
Yes.
scores. Did you sort of collect a whole bunch of interesting stories and then say, how can I sort of lay these out end to end in a somewhat followable narrative? Or did you already have a structure in play and then it like wasn't that hard to just go, well, there's an example over there, there's an example over there, because it's literally everywhere?
Yeah, I didn't have a master plan for the set of projects that appears in this book. It's a set of criminal legal topics.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you just named those: policing, bail, jail, sentencing, risk scores. And it's a set of things I worked on. But as I worked through them over the course of a number of years, I really saw these same common themes just emerging over and over again. The racial disparities, the difficulty of getting data, the biases that are built into the data that we do have, all these kinds of things. And I just thought, like, there's a story here that needs to be told. And part of the way I've tried to weave these things and tell this story is this is a story of hope. So I think that these days, if people in the US public like know about anything at the intersection of technical fields and social justice, it's like very likely to be something related to like the harms that algorithms can cause, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah, yeah.
ways that we're surveilled, or like the ways that generative AI is biased and causing us problems, like these sorts of things. And these things are all true and extremely serious. What I wanted to show with these stories is the optimistic flip side of this, which is that when used carefully and in the right way, data science can be a powerful tool for justice. And this is really, I have to give credit, in the spirit of my hero, who's like the civil rights icon, Ida B. Wells, who said that the way to right wrongs is to shine the light of truth upon them. And so that's really what I'm after, is like data as a form of that light. So yeah, I had no master plan. It was like things I worked on and the common themes emerged as I did it.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And so, how did you sort of approach the audience, as an individual who has been in academia for quite some time? I often will talk to folks about that difference between writing an academic publication. I mean, other than the obvious difference, which is that one makes no money and the other one sometimes makes money if it doesn't always. But the difference between an academic publication and a trade publication, writing for a more general audience. Obviously, I think all of our best professors already do that when they focus and put effort into their teaching, because undergraduates are a more general audience. And then, of course, as they get more and more specialized, you can become more specialized and specific in your language. So, what was that process like for you, taking these concepts and writing them in a way that is digestible?
It was a challenging and extremely fulfilling experience. So look, I am, as we have said, at a first and foremost teaching focused institution. I'm at a small liberal arts college. I love teaching. I love helping people understand new concepts, understand complicated concepts. And so this book is in that spirit. It's an effort to do that. I have always enjoyed public speaking, right? Telling the public stories in ways that they can understand. I have enjoyed writing op-eds, which is a different form of public writing, but again, it can't be technical, right? You want to get a message to people, like you can be nerdy, and I love being nerdy, but you can be nerdy in an accessible way. And that's what I've been after. And it was the same thing with this book. Now, that is not to say that I did it perfectly from the start. I most assuredly did not. And this is the magic of wonderful editors, right?
Right.
So I drafted this book thinking, like, perhaps a little bit with a little bit of hubris, like, okay, I've like told these stories in such plain language. This is going to be so understandable. And I hired this wonderful like pre-submission freelance editor, Nancy Rollinson, who's just brilliant. And she was like, Chad, like, I think perhaps this is not as accessible as you think it is. Uh, and so Nancy, to her credit, like pushed on me really hard in places where, like, yes, I realize you think that you are teaching this concept clearly, but like you need to do better here. And then I have an editor at my publisher at Princeton University Press. My editor, Diana Galuli, did an equally amazing job pushing on me in those places. So I think if I were to sit down and write this book again from scratch, I would understand better and I would be able to do it better from scratch. And so I'm always grateful when anything is a learning experience for me as well, right? Like I hope the book teaches the public something, but it taught me something too.
Absolutely. Do you think that it's something you will endeavor to do again? It's, I talk to a lot of writers who, and I think I'm sort of in that boat. Like I've written a lot academically, but I'm not ready. I keep telling my editor, I'm not ready. Like sitting down to write a whole book is like the most daunting thing in the world. But then when I talk to folks who are like, I did the book, then they're like, well, I'm going to do another one. I'm like, oh, that's crazy. Do you feel like you've gotten bit by the bug, or are you like, yeah, we're going to put that on the shelf for a while. I need a break.
Okay, this is not a promise to you or to anyone listening, but I am probably in the bit by the bug camp.
Oh, I love
And
it.
it is part of this is because I am someone who could never decide what they wanted to be when they grew up. And apparently I'm
Mhm.
still not grown up and I still don't know. And like, yes, I love doing math. And I love doing data science, but I love communicating and I love writing just as much. And I love 20 other things just as much. So and there was a point in my life where I thought I wanted to be a journalist as sort of my profession. So
Mhm.
I really do enjoy the process of writing. I have some ideas for what a next book might look like, but I haven't settled on any of them yet, and it's not developed yet. But I think I would like to do more. Yes.
Oh, well, I won't hold you to it, but I am looking forward. So, on that note, Chad, let me know. We're kind of coming up to the close of the hour. Is there anything that you can think of that, I mean, obviously there's so much we didn't touch on, but if there's is there anything you can think of where you're like, I can't believe we got to talk about this one thing, like anything that you feel remiss in not bringing up before we end the hour?
Thank you for asking. I will say yes, and I'll make it brief. I really, as I said, wanted this book to be a book of hope. And one thing I
Mhm.
try to do at the end of each chapter is for any reader, even people who think they do not love numbers and do not love data, this book is still for them. And I try to give ways to help anyone highlight the importance of how data can be used for justice. And
Mm.
then in the last chapter of the book, I talk about, I don't know if you know Rebecca Solnit's book, Hope in the Dark, which is like a wonderful, um, treatise or meditation on like how we might think about hope and how part of hope is
Ugh.
openness to the unknown.
I need
and
to read that because I've only read
it's
Men Explain Things to Me by her. So yeah, I've
also
definitely read her mansplaining book, but I should read this.
also an important book. And I
Yeah.
think, look, we have always had problems in this country, but we have a lot of problems right now. It is a very trying time. I think
hmm
people wake up and more than ever feel the weight of reality on them. And so one of the most important reasons I wrote this book was to try to give people a little bit more of a sense of agency in ways that they may not have felt before, and to provide them with a little bit of hope.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. Everybody, the book is Unlocking Justice: The Power of Data to Confront Inequity and Create Change by Dr. Chad M. Topaz. Chad, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's really been an honor to meet you and talk with you and your listeners.
And everybody listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.